The millionaire married a fake bride for his ailing mother, but her one rule changed the deal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Liam West sat at the large mahogany desk in his luxurious Manhattan office, staring out at the city skyline. The view was spectacular, the world was at his feet, and yet, he felt a nagging emptiness gnawing at him. His phone buzzed on the desk, its screen lighting up with a message from his mother, Elena. Her health had been deteriorating for months now, and he had been doing everything in his power to care for her. But there was one thing his mother had insisted on. She wanted to see him married before it was too late. At 35, Liam had no time for relationships, no desire for a wife, not with the demands of running his tech empire. But his mother's condition was growing worse, and her request was becoming an obsession. You know what I need, Liam. You're not getting any younger. Please, just find someone, anyone. Make me happy before I go. Her words echoed in his mind. He rubbed his temples, torn between duty and the life he had built. Then, a thought struck him. What if he could hire someone, a woman who would play the role of his wife for a few months? It would satisfy his mother's wish, and he wouldn't have to deal with the complexities of a real relationship. That's when he found Sophie Green, a woman in desperate need of money, struggling to support herself and her young son. Sophie was a waitress, someone who had no interest in the wealthy life Liam led. She was strong, independent, and exactly what he needed. He reached out to her, offering a deal she couldn't refuse, a marriage contract, in exchange for a significant amount of money. She would marry him, live with him for a few months, and when it was over, she would walk away with her. Payment and a fresh start. No strings attached. Sophie was hesitant at first, but the money he offered would help her get back on her feet. She had nothing left to lose, and her son's future depended on this. So, she agreed to his terms. Sophie was a woman of few words, and Liam appreciated her no-nonsense attitude. She wasn't looking for love, and neither was he. Their agreement was simple. She would be his wife in name only, a mere formality to appease his mother. But there was one condition Sophie had set. I won't be your wife if you try to control my life. I do this for the money, nothing else. She had made it clear that she wouldn't tolerate any interference in her personal space, and Liam agreed, even though it left him intrigued. There was something about Sophie that was different from the women he usually encountered. She wasn't interested in his wealth, and that was oddly refreshing. As they moved forward with their agreement, Sophie took up residence in his penthouse, and the charade began. They attended social gatherings, events with his mother, and business meetings, all while keeping up the pretense of a perfect, albeit unusual, marriage. But as the days passed, Liam found himself questioning the simplicity of their arrangement. Sophie wasn't like the others. She wasn't impressed by his wealth. She wasn't asking for anything, and she didn't cling to him like the other women who flocked around him. Instead, she kept to herself, focused on her own life, and only interacted with him when necessary. It was all so straightforward, and yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was slowly falling for her. But Liam kept his distance. After all, their marriage was a business deal, and he had no intentions of complicating things with emotions. Sophie, on the other hand, was determined to stay focused on her goal. She didn't care for his money, but she saw how much he struggled with his mother's illness and how much pressure he was under. She couldn't help but feel sympathy for him, even though she knew it was none of her business. As the days went by, their conversations began to shift. They started talking about things other than business or their contract. Sophie would share stories of her life before meeting Liam, and he would tell her about the pressures of running a multi-million-dollar company. For the first time in a long time, Liam felt like he could open up to someone who wasn't trying to get something from him. But then came the night that would change everything. They were attending a charity gala that Liam had organized for his company, a night of glamour and high society. Sophie, of course, was there with him, playing the role of his wife, though she had made it clear she would never truly be his partner. As they entered the ballroom, the host announced the evening's special guests. And now, let's welcome our guest of honor, Liam West and his beautiful wife, Sophie Green, the host called out. The room fell silent as the spotlight shone on them, and all eyes turned to Sophie. It was in that moment that Sophie realized something she hadn't seen before. The world of wealth and power was a prison. She had agreed to this arrangement for the money, but now, standing in front of so many people, she could feel the weight of her decision. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about something much deeper. Sophie turned to Liam, her heart racing. This was no longer just a contract. This was real. The one rule she had set, the rule about keeping her own life separate from his, had already been tested. Now, it was time for them to face the truth. Was their marriage just a business deal, or had something real started to develop between them? The evening was about to take a turn, and neither of them knew what to expect. But one thing was certain, things were about to change. The evening was unfolding with all the elegance and grandeur that Liam had expected. The ballroom shimmered with opulent chandeliers, the soft hum of jazz music filling the air. People in tuxedos and glamorous dresses mingled, laughing and chatting, their voices blending into the background of clinking glasses. Sophie stood at Liam's side, her posture poised yet stiff, the bright lights of the gala casting an almost surreal glow on her. She had played the role of his wife perfectly for weeks, attending events, dinners, and charity galas, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just another business function. This was the night where everything would come to a head. Sophie had spent the evening keeping her distance from Liam, trying her best to look like she belonged in this world, though she still felt out of place. She had never been a part of the social elite before, and tonight, it felt more suffocating than usual. As the announcement came, Sophie's thoughts were interrupted. Let's welcome our guest of honor, Liam West, and his beautiful wife, Sophie Green, the host said, his voice echoing through the hall. The spotlight shifted to them, and for a brief moment, Sophie froze. She felt the weight of every eye on her. It was strange. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. She had agreed to the arrangement to make sure her son had a future, but now, as she stood next to Liam in front of so many people, she realized that the life they had built together, even if it was based on a lie, was starting to feel real. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a contract anymore. She had known it from the start, but tonight it was impossible to ignore. Her one condition, no interference in her personal life, was already being tested, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up the act. As the night progressed, Sophie and Liam continued to play their parts. They smiled for the cameras, exchanged pleasantries with important guests, and laughed when it was expected of them. But underneath the surface, Sophie couldn't shake the growing tension in her chest. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let emotions get in the way of the arrangement. This was about securing her son's future, nothing more. But with every passing moment, she found herself drawn more and more to Liam. The way he listened when she spoke, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, it was all too much to ignore. Was it possible that Liam, the cold, calculating businessman she had known only as a deal-maker, was starting to care for her? After a while, Sophie excused herself from the crowd, stepping out onto the balcony to clear her head. The cool night air hit her face, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her. She thought about her life before this strange marriage. She had been independent, strong, focused solely on providing for her son. Now, she was caught in a world she didn't belong to, a world of wealth and expectations. It was hard to escape the pressure of living a lie, even if it was a lie that was supposed to save her family. Just then, Liam appeared beside her. He stood silently for a moment, watching the city lights. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Sophie turned to him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "I'm fine," she said quickly, trying to dismiss the growing emotions inside her. "Just needed a break from the crowds." Liam nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "You're doing a great job," he said, his voice low but sincere. Sophie looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. The sincerity in his words caught her off guard. She had expected him to be aloof, indifferent. But tonight, he seemed different. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling a knot form in her stomach. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. Then, Liam spoke again, his tone more serious now. "You know, I never intended for any of this to get complicated." Sophie looked at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, as if unsure how to continue. I didn't expect to get attached, he said quietly. Sophie felt her breath catch in her throat. Was he admitting what she thought he was? Liam, she began, her voice trembling slightly. We agreed. This is just for the money. We're not supposed to. But before she could finish, he reached out, gently touching her arm. His touch sent a shock through her. I know, he said, his voice steady. But sometimes, things don't go according to plan. Sophie looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of deceit, but all she saw was sincerity. For the first time in weeks, she felt the walls she had carefully built around her heart start to crack. The night had taken a turn, and now, the question wasn't whether their marriage was real. It was whether they could both admit that what had started as a business arrangement was becoming something much more complicated. The gala continued in full swing behind them, but in that moment, Sophie felt like the only two people in the room were her and Liam. And for the first time, she wasn't sure where this story was heading. Was it the beginning of something new, or the unraveling of the deal they had both so carefully constructed? The weeks that followed the gala were filled with an awkward tension that neither Liam nor Sophie could ignore. Their arrangement, which had started as a simple contract, was becoming more complicated by the day. Liam found himself thinking about Sophie more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just the way she looked at him. It was the way she spoke, the way she didn't need anything from him. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, his title, or his company. She was real, and it was both refreshing and terrifying. Sophie, on the other hand, felt the walls she had carefully built around her heart begin to crack. She had told herself from the very beginning that this was just a business deal, nothing more. But as days turned into weeks, and their interactions became more frequent, she started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, her feelings were beginning to change. She couldn't help but notice the little things. The way Liam would subtly check if she was okay during meetings, the way he always made sure she was included in conversations, or how he never let anyone treat her like an outsider. It wasn't something she had ever expected, but she found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't anticipated. One evening, Liam invited Sophie to dinner at his penthouse, just the two of them. It was supposed to be a casual meal, but as soon as Sophie stepped into the luxurious apartment, she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. It wasn't just a dinner between two strangers anymore. This was more than that. As they sat down to eat, the conversation was lighter than usual. They spoke about everything and nothing: work, the weather, their favorite movies, anything to avoid addressing the elephant in the room. But despite the casual tone, Sophie could feel the tension building. Liam wasn't the same man he had been when they first met. His confidence was still there, but there was something softer now, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Sophie took a deep breath, then looked him in the eye. Liam, she began, her voice hesitant. We need to talk. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her seriousness. About what? He asked, leaning back in his chair. About us, she said softly. About this whole thing. Liam stiffened for a moment, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. What do you mean? He asked, though his tone was more guarded now. I mean, Sophie paused, gathering her thoughts. We agreed from the beginning that this was just a business arrangement. No emotions, no strings attached. But lately, it feels different. I'm starting to feel like we're crossing a line, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. Liam didn't respond immediately. He just sat there, staring at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed her words. Sophie could see the conflict in his expression. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the truth was there, hanging between them. Sophie, he finally said, his voice quieter than usual. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect to feel like this. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard him speak like that before. She had expected him to brush it off, to pretend that nothing had changed, but instead, he was being honest, vulnerable even. I didn't expect to get attached either, he continued, his gaze softening as he looked at her. But here we are. Sophie looked away, unsure of what to say next. This wasn't part of the plan. She had promised herself that she wouldn't get caught up in this. But as much as she tried to deny it, she was already in too deep. I'm sorry, Liam said, his voice full of regret. I should have kept my distance. I shouldn't have let things get this complicated. Sophie shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. No, it's not your fault, she said softly. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't think I'd start to care. The silence that followed was heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. Neither of them knew what to say next. But then, Liam reached across the table, gently touching her hand. Sophie froze for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected him to do that, not after everything. But in that moment, everything felt different. I don't want to complicate things, Liam said quietly. But I don't want to lose you either. Sophie's heart raced in her chest as she looked into his eyes. She had spent so much time trying to keep her distance, trying to remind herself that this was just a deal. But now, with his hand on hers, it was impossible to ignore what she had been feeling all along. Liam, she whispered, her voice trembling. What are we doing? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand, as if trying to reassure her that whatever was happening between them, they would figure it out together. For the first time in weeks, Sophie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't all just a game. Maybe it was something more. The night stretched on in a comfortable silence as the two of them sat together, their hands still entwined. Neither of them knew what the future held, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were together, and for once, they were both ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed that evening were a blur for Sophie. Her mind raced with confusion, trying to process everything that had happened between her and Liam. She had promised herself that she wouldn't let this arrangement get complicated, but now, it was impossible to ignore what had been growing between them. She could still feel the warmth of his hand on hers, the sincerity in his eyes when he had admitted he didn't want to lose her. Was it possible that what started as a business deal could evolve into something real? Sophie wasn't sure, but she couldn't deny that her feelings for Liam had begun to change. Meanwhile, Liam was equally torn. He had spent so long building his life around his work, his wealth, and the walls he had put up around his emotions. Sophie had been nothing more than a business arrangement at first, a way to appease his mother's dying wish. But now, he found himself thinking about her constantly. She wasn't like the women he was used to. She didn't care about his status, his money, or his business empire. She was real, and for the first time, he felt like someone saw him for who he truly was, not just as the man with the big name and even bigger fortune. But Liam couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt, knowing he had started this arrangement with no intention of letting emotions interfere. He had promised Sophie that this would be temporary, that it would be just a contract. And yet, now, he found himself questioning everything. What if he was falling for her? Was it too late to undo what had already begun? One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Liam found himself pacing the floor of his penthouse. He had called Sophie earlier, asking her to meet him for dinner. It wasn't anything formal, just the two of them, like the last time. He needed to talk to her, to figure out where they stood. Sophie arrived, looking as beautiful as ever, her long brown hair cascading over her shoulders. As soon as she walked in, Liam felt a wave of warmth rush over him. She smiled at him, and for a moment, everything else in the world faded away. They sat down at the table, and the conversation flowed easily, just like it always did. They laughed about small things, work, life, and the awkward moments they had shared during their time together. But as the night wore on, the air between them shifted. There was something unspoken hanging in the silence, and both of them knew it. Finally, Sophie set her fork down and looked at him, her eyes serious. "Liam," she said softly, "we need to talk about what happens next." Liam's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to say. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sophie took a deep breath. "I can't keep pretending like this isn't real," she said, her voice trembling. "I came into this with a clear idea of what it was. A contract. A way out. But somewhere along the way, I started to care. And now, I'm not sure if I can keep pretending that I don't feel something for you." Liam felt a surge of emotions flood through him. He had never expected her to admit this, but at the same time, he had known deep down that she was feeling something. And now, here they were, staring at each other, both unsure of what to do next. He reached across the table and took her hand in his thumb gently rubbing the back of her hand. "Sophie," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "I never wanted this to happen. But I can't deny it either. I'm not sure what this is or where it's going, but I don't want to lose you. I can't keep pretending like we're just going through the motions. You mean more to me than I ever thought possible. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected him to say those words. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to care, but hearing him say it out loud was different. It was more than she had hoped for, and yet, it made everything even more complicated. But what does that mean for us? Sophie whispered. What happens now? Liam didn't have an immediate answer. He wasn't sure himself. All he knew was that he couldn't go back to the way things were. He had built his empire with hard work, but he had never truly understood what it meant to have someone to share it with, someone to love. And now, he realized, he didn't want to live without her. I don't have all the answers, Liam said slowly. But I know one thing for sure. I don't want to lose you. I'm willing to figure this out, no matter how complicated it gets. If you'll give me the chance. Sophie's heart raced as she looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never expected to find herself in this position, but now, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. Okay, she said softly, her voice full of emotion. Let's figure it out, together. In that moment, everything changed. They both knew that their lives would never be the same again. The deal had been struck, but now it wasn't just about a contract. It was about love, trust, and the chance to build something real together. And no matter how uncertain the future was, they were willing to take the first step together. The following weeks were filled with a whirlwind of emotions and decisions for both Liam and Sophie. They had agreed to give their feelings a chance, but the reality of their situation weighed heavily on both of them. Their arrangement had started as a business deal, a simple contract, but now it was turning into something much more complicated. Sophie found herself spending more and more time in Liam's world, a world she had never imagined she would be a part of. They attended charity events together, shared private moments, and slowly began to learn more about each other. Liam was no longer just the wealthy businessman. He was a man who cared deeply about Sophie, about her son, and about the life they were building together. Sophie, on the other hand, found herself falling for him in ways she hadn't expected. She had come into this arrangement with the intention of keeping things strictly professional, but the more time she spent with Liam, the more she realized that she was no longer just his wife in name only. They had started to build something real, something that went beyond the terms of their contract. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Liam invited Sophie to his private study for a drink. The space was warm and inviting, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. Liam poured them both a glass of wine and sat across from her, his eyes studying her carefully. Sophie, he began, his voice low and serious, I've been thinking a lot about us, about what's next. Sophie took a sip of her wine, trying to steady her nerves. She knew this conversation was coming. They couldn't avoid it forever. I've been thinking about it too, she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. I know we agreed to take things slow, to see where this goes, but I think we both know it's no longer just about a contract. It's about us, about what we want from this. Liam nodded, a flicker of vulnerability passing through his eyes. I know, he said quietly. I can't keep pretending that this is just a business arrangement. I care about you, Sophie. I never expected to feel this way, but I do. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that Liam was different, but hearing him admit it out loud made everything feel even more real. She set her glass down, meeting his gaze. And what about the future? She asked softly. What do we do now? Liam leaned forward, his voice firm with resolve. I want us to have a future together. I don't want this to end when the contract is up. I want us to build something lasting, something real. But I also know that it's not going to be easy. Sophie felt a mixture of hope and fear in her chest. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, but now that she was here, she couldn't deny that her feelings for Liam were just as real as his were for her. It won't be easy, she agreed, her voice soft but certain, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this can go, together. Liam reached across the table, taking her hand in his, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver down her spine. You're willing to give us a chance? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. Yes, I am. We're in this together now, Liam. No turning back. As they sat there, their hands intertwined, they both knew that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer just two people playing a role. They were partners, a team, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt a sense of peace. She had found something she didn't expect, a chance at love, a chance at a new life, and the possibility of building a future with the man who had once been nothing more than a business arrangement. The days ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time, Sophie felt ready to face them. She wasn't alone anymore. They had made the decision to move forward together, and no matter what happened, they would take it one step at a time. As the weeks passed, Liam and Sophie settled into a routine, one that felt both comfortable and uncertain at the same time. They were no longer just playing roles. They had become something more, even if neither of them knew exactly what that was. The trust they had built over the past few months was undeniable, but there was still an underlying tension, a hesitation about fully letting go of the past. Sophie, despite the growing bond between them, found herself questioning if she was truly ready for the life Liam was offering. She had spent so many years protecting her heart, building walls to keep herself safe from disappointment and hurt. Now, she was being asked to open up, to trust in something real, and she wasn't sure if she could let go of her fears. Liam, on the other hand, was doing his best to navigate the complex emotions that had developed. Between him and Sophie, he had spent so much time focusing on his business, his success, and his image, but now, he found himself thinking about her constantly. He couldn't deny it anymore. He was falling for her. But even as he acknowledged his feelings, he struggled with the weight of his past. He had never been one to let anyone get close to him, especially not someone like Sophie. She was different. She didn't care about his wealth or his status, and that was both terrifying and freeing. One afternoon, as they were sitting together in Liam's office, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that they were at a crossroads. She had been avoiding the conversation for weeks, but now, it was impossible to ignore. She had to know where they stood, what their future looked like. "Liam," she began, her voice hesitant, "we need to talk about something." He looked up from the papers in front of him, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's on your mind?" he asked, setting the papers aside. Sophie took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next," she said, her words carefully chosen. "We've built something real, but I can't keep pretending like I don't have doubts. I need to know, what do you want from me? What do you want from us?" Liam's heart skipped a beat. He had been hoping this conversation would come, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to answer. He had never been good with vulnerability, never been good at expressing his emotions, but he couldn't hide behind his walls anymore. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice steady but sincere, "I want you. I want all of you. This isn't just about the deal anymore. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. I know it's complicated, but I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith. I'm asking you to take this journey with me. Whatever happens next, I want us to face it together." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had heard him say the words, but she still wasn't sure if she was ready to believe them. She had spent so long protecting herself, keeping a safe distance from everything that could hurt her. But the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his voice, it made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something lasting. "I don't know if I'm ready to give you everything," she admitted quietly, "but I know that I don't want to lose what we have. You're right. This isn't just about the contract anymore. It's about us, about building a future. And I'm willing to try, if you are." Liam reached across the table, taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of reassurance through her. He wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for the chance to build something real together. And that was all she needed to hear. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, his thumb gently brushing her knuckles. "One step at a time. We don't need to have all the answers right now. All that matters is that we're in this together." Sophie smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. They didn't have all the answers, and the future was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever came next, with Liam by her side. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and moments of fear, but Sophie knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found something real, something worth fighting for, and no matter what happened, she was ready to take that first step into the future with Liam. The future they would build together. The weeks following their heartfelt conversation brought a newfound sense of understanding between Liam and Sophie, but the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. Sophie had opened her heart, and Liam had done the same. But their relationship, which had started as a business arrangement, was still navigating the complexities of blending their lives together. Liam's world, a world of high-profile meetings, luxury, and public attention, was a far cry from Sophie's simple, grounded existence. Despite their growing connection, there were moments when Sophie felt like a stranger in Liam's life. She wasn't used to the extravagant events, the constant presence of reporters, and the social expectations that came with being the partner of a billionaire. On the other hand, Liam found himself torn between two worlds, the one he had spent his life building and the one he now wanted to create with Sophie. He had never been one to open up to anyone, yet Sophie made him feel things he didn't know were possible. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about trust, vulnerability, and a commitment to something real. One evening, Liam invited Sophie to a private dinner at his penthouse. The night was calm, the city lights twinkling outside, but inside, a sense of unease lingered between them. As they sat down to eat, the silence felt heavier than usual. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and he could see that Sophie was lost in her thoughts. He finally broke the silence. "Sophie," he began, his voice soft but serious, "we need to talk about what's going on. About us." Sophie looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She had been dreading this moment. She had hoped they could avoid having this conversation for a little longer, but deep down, she knew it was inevitable. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam's expression softened. "I don't want to lose you, Sophie, but I can see that you're not fully comfortable with everything, with this life, with me. And I don't want you to feel like you're stuck in something you didn't sign up for." Sophie felt her heart race. She had spent so much time convincing herself that this was just a business deal, that she wasn't falling for him. But now, hearing his words, it all felt so much more real. She had started to care about him, in ways she hadn't expected. "Liam," she said, taking a deep breath, "I don't want to lose you either. But I don't know how to fit into this world of yours. I didn't grow up in it. I don't belong in it. Sometimes, it feels like I'm just pretending." Liam reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "Sophie," he said, his voice full of sincerity, "I know this world is different from what you're used to, but you belong here with me. I don't want you to change. I don't want you to feel like you have to be someone else to fit in. This isn't about the events or the fancy dinners. This is about us, about what we want together. You're not pretending. You're real. And that's what I love about you." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected him to say those words, and for a moment, everything felt clearer. The walls she had built around her heart had slowly begun to crumble, and in their place, a new sense of hope began to take root. "I don't know how this is all going to work," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I know that I don't want to let go of what we've built. I'm willing to try, Liam. I'm willing to step into this world with you, even if it scares me." Liam smiled, a mixture of relief and affection crossing his features. "We'll figure it out together," he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "One step at a time. There's no rush. We don't have to have everything figured out right now. All that matters is that we're in this together." Sophie nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path, even though the road ahead was still uncertain. They both had their fears, their doubts, but they also had something stronger, each other. The next few weeks brought more moments of clarity. They spent more time together, learning about each other's worlds, slowly integrating their lives, and finding a rhythm that worked for them. There were still moments of tension, moments when Sophie felt out of place in Liam's world, but they learned to navigate those moments together. Liam, too, had his moments of doubt, questioning whether he was doing the right thing, whether he was being fair to Sophie. But every time he looked at her, he knew that she was worth the risk. She had shown him a world of warmth and love that he had never experienced before, and he wasn't willing to let go of that. As they moved forward, Liam and Sophie began to understand that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about fitting into a mold or meeting expectations. Love was about two people willing to show up for each other, to be vulnerable, and to build something real, no matter how messy it got. And in that moment, as they stood together, side by side, ready to face whatever came next, they both knew one thing for certain. They had found something worth fighting for. As the months passed, Liam and Sophie's bond grew stronger, but so did the challenges they faced. The more they tried to blend their two worlds, the more complicated things seemed to get. Sophie found herself caught between two realities: the life she had built on her own and the life Liam was offering her. Liam, for all his wealth and success, struggled with the weight of his past, the expectations that came with his family name, and the constant pressure of maintaining the image he had spent so many years creating. They had made it through the toughest parts, but the road ahead was still filled with obstacles. One evening, as they sat together in Liam's penthouse, the tension between them was palpable. Sophie had been thinking a lot about her future, about her son, and about what kind of life she wanted to create for herself. She knew that she had to make some difficult decisions. Liam could see that something was on her mind. He watched her closely, knowing that this conversation was long overdue. "Sophie," he said gently, his voice soft but steady, "you've been quiet lately. What's going on? Are we okay?" Sophie hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts before she spoke. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I've been thinking about everything. About us, about the future, about my son. I want to be with you. I do, but I'm scared. Scared of getting too comfortable in this life. Scared of what might happen if it all falls apart." Liam's heart sank as he listened to her words. He had known that this wasn't going to be easy, but hearing her admit her fears made him realize just how much was at stake. "I understand," he said softly, his voice full of empathy. "But I don't want you to be scared. I'm here, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere. We don't have to figure everything out today. We can take it one step at a time, together." Sophie looked at him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. "I don't know if I can do this, Liam," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've been independent for so long, and I don't know if I'm ready to give that up. I don't know if I can fully trust this, trust you, trust us." Liam reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to give up who you are, Sophie. You're strong, independent, and I admire that. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust what we have, and to take this journey with me. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise that I'll be here every step of the way." Sophie closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been so afraid of losing herself in this relationship, of giving up the life she had worked so hard to build. But now, as she sat there with Liam, she realized that maybe she didn't have to choose between the two. Maybe she could have both, the love she wanted and the independence she needed. "I want to believe that," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I really do." Liam smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "You don't have to believe it all at once. We'll take it slow, and we'll figure it out together. But I promise you, Sophie, this is real. What we have is real, and I'm not going anywhere." Sophie nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to believe in something, in someone, and now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. "I want to try, Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I want to try to make this work." Liam squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with relief. "We will," he said softly. "We will make it work, together." The days that followed were filled with new beginnings. Liam and Sophie took their time, navigating the complexities of their relationship, slowly finding a balance between their worlds. Sophie began to let go of her fears, trusting Liam more each day, and Liam, for his part, continued to show her that he was committed to their future. There were still difficult conversations to have, still moments of doubt, but they were facing it all together. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found love, she had found trust, and most importantly, she had found someone who truly understood her. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. As Liam and Sophie moved forward, they knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and obstacles to overcome. But they were ready for whatever came next. They had made the decision to face the future together, and for the first time, both of them felt certain that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. Months passed, and the life that Liam and Sophie had built together continued to grow stronger, rooted in love, trust, and shared understanding. The fears and doubts that once clouded their relationship had been replaced with a deep commitment to one another. Sophie, who had once been terrified of losing herself, now found herself embracing the life they were building. She no longer saw Liam's world as something foreign or overwhelming. With his support, she had learned to balance both her independence and her place in his world. They had faced the complexities of their arrangement head-on, and with each passing day, the walls Sophie had once built around her heart continued to fall away. She had come to realize that it wasn't about choosing between the life she had known and the life she was now living. She could have both, a love that was real and the freedom she cherished. For Liam, the journey had been just as transformative. He had spent so many years hiding behind his wealth, his business empire, and his social status. But Sophie had shown him what it truly meant to open up, to trust, and to love without reservation. He had never imagined that a woman like her could come into his life and change everything. Sophie had taught him that love wasn't about grand gestures or public approval. It was about the small, quiet moments that made all the difference. It was about being there for each other, no matter the circumstances. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the city, Liam took Sophie to the very place where their journey had started, the quiet balcony of his penthouse. The city was bustling below, but up here, it was just the two of them. Sophie smiled as she looked out at the horizon, the weight of their past struggles now behind them. She had never imagined that she would find herself here, in a life she had once thought was out of reach. But now, standing next to Liam, she felt more at home than she ever had before. "Do you remember when we first met?" Liam asked, his voice soft as he stood beside her. Sophie laughed, her eyes sparkling. "How could I forget?" she replied. "You were a businessman with a contract, and I was just trying to make ends meet." Liam smiled, the memory of that first meeting still fresh in his mind. "It's hard to believe that was only a few months ago," he said. "We've come a long way since then." Sophie nodded, her hand resting gently in his. "We have," she said quietly, "and I wouldn't change a thing." Liam turned to face her, his expression serious, yet filled with warmth. "Sophie," he began, his voice full of emotion, "I want you to know that I'm not just here for now. I'm here for the long haul. I don't want this to be a chapter in our lives. I want it to be the beginning of something that lasts." Sophie felt her heart swell at his words. She had known for a while that what they had was real, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel official. "I want that too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Liam gently cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with a mixture of love and determination. "Then let's make it official," he said. "Let's build a future together. One that's not based on contracts, but on love, trust, and partnership." Sophie's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she was speechless. She had never imagined that a simple arrangement could turn into something so real, so meaningful. And yet, here she was, standing beside the man she had fallen in love with, ready to take the next step in their journey together. "Yes," she said softly, her eyes shining with emotion. "Let's do it. Let's make this real." Without another word, Liam pulled her into his arms, and they kissed under the fading light of the setting sun. It was a kiss full of promise, of hope, and of everything they had worked for. The future ahead of them was uncertain, but for the first time, they didn't need to know every step. They knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything that came their way. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they both knew that this was just the beginning of a life filled with love, trust, and the possibility of a future they could build together. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, knowing that they had found something truly special, something worth fighting for.